This episode of The Candid Frame is brought to you by the Charcoal Book Club. Their carefully curated selections reflects the best in contemporary photography, and all for a reasonable price. And they're delivered directly to your doorstep each month. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. It's a great way to begin or expand your photo library. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today. And remember to use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout. I know how transformative photography can be. When a counselor at the Boys Club of Hollywood introduced me to the magic of photography, neither he nor I could have imagined how making pictures would change my life. Many of you have a similar story, whether you came to photography in your youth or later in life. You know how photography can bring fulfillment, meaning, and joy to one's life. Kirsten Elstner understands that well as the founder and director of the National Geographic Photo Camp, whose mission is to bring the joy and empowerment of photography to youth worldwide. For over 20 years, she and her team of photographers and educators have traveled to over 35 countries, inspiring young men and women to tell their own stories through photography. The book, Photo Camp Stories, Our World Through the Lens of Young Photographers, celebrates the many lives the program has touched and the stories they've been able to tell. This is Ibari X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Well, welcome to the show. It's great to have you. Looking forward to learning more about this program that you founded. But I wanted to start with a question that I have for you is, when did photography change the path of your life?
Oh, that would have been, I guess when I was in college. So just taking that first photography class, and, back then I was working in the darkroom, and like so many photographers, just being amazed by that process of shooting black and white film and working in the darkroom. So I would say it was when I was in college and deciding to pursue photography as a career path.
Was it that the sort of cliched but still valid moment of seeing that image appear in the developing tray?
So true. Yes. I mean, I'll never forget that. Just watching it appear the first time and thinking, oh my gosh, this is like magic. And it has been ever since.
Did you immediately have a sense, or in short order, did you recognize the power of photographs to just tell a story, to move beyond just making a nice singular photograph, or did that come with time?
I think, that took a while. I don't think I realized that right away. And it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do with photography. I just knew that I loved it and it was what I was going to do with my life. But it took some roundabout routes on the journey to figure out how I could use it, or how I could work with photography to be useful in this world.
And what was your first foray into actually trying to make a life revolving around photography?
The first foray was I traveled to New Zealand because my father, for graduation, said, okay, I'm going to help you for your graduation gift. You can pick anywhere in the world that you'd like to go. I'm going to help you get there. So I picked New Zealand, and the caveat was that I had to figure out how to get back. So it was a one-way ticket. So it was a one-way ticket. And so I went to New Zealand and I worked on an organic sheep farm and did all these things. But my first foray into photography was that I worked as a photographer for a whitewater rafting company. And we were shooting film, and I would like shimmy down the rocks, take the pictures of the whitewater rafters, shimmy back up the rocks, print the pictures, and sell them to the rafters. So that was the first time I thought, I could actually earn money doing this.
I'm really impressed with your dad.
Yeah, it was the coolest thing he ever did.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, you can get out there and have an amazing experience.
How to get back,
And so how did you start really making a career revolving around photography?
Yeah. So I came back from those travels, and realized I should start at home. And so I went back to my home in Erie, Pennsylvania, and started writing articles for the local newspaper and doing photography just as a freelancer. And then that started a long stint of freelancing. My brother lived in Washington, D.C. I came down here and stayed with him and started working for wire services and Reuters and AFP and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent. I was an assistant for National Geographic back then and just started piecing together the freelance life with photography, which was pretty good and pretty exciting for a time.
So were you learning storytelling, visual storytelling, like as you were, developing your skills and working and doing it?
Yeah, for sure. And then at a certain point, I decided you certainly don't need to go to school for photography or to grad school, but I decided that I needed to do that. I needed more training. So I went to Ohio University and did their 1-year master's program. The master's degree itself didn't mean anything, but the experience that I got there was really invaluable to me at that time.
What was something that you learned there that you feel like you've carried throughout your career, both as a photographer and as an educator?
That you should decide what motivates you. And even with photography, what is important to you. So for a while after graduate school and during and after graduate school, I thought it was newspaper photography, and I was, that was going to carry me through my career. But I think I learned there that it wasn't going to satisfy me. I think to try to get on the front page of the newspaper. I really admire people that do that and still do that to this day, but that wasn't for me. And so I think I learned there that I needed to do something that I thought would be sort of giving back with my skills and my talents and what I was learning about photography. I wanted to do something that gave back. And I think in lots of creative careers, including photography, you can do that.
I was reading you had sort of the germ of this idea for Photo Camp for a while, and you had talked to other, your other compatriots, other photographers about this idea, and it finally sort of manifests itself. When you're making a living as a photographer, you're so busy with just doing that, making a living, especially as a freelancer, making, getting the next assignment and hustling.
All the time.
And the idea of taking on this whole new project that is going to be its own job, can be, daunting to the point that most people will just go, okay, I'll do it when I get older. But you didn't wait. Why at that particular moment was it important enough for you to put in the time and the effort to make it happen?
I don't know. I just think I really cared about designing my life the way that I wanted it to be. And maybe that's something that I learned from my dad and my mom as well. That we just had that kind of family, I think, where, it was important, or it is important to try and do something useful and meaningful with your life. And I think even, at a young age, as I was trying to find my way, and where I fit into the world of photojournalism, and maybe the people I surrounded myself. As you probably know, photographers are really, really cool people. They're really, really interesting, sensitive and caring people. And I think I was hanging around with a lot of photographers. We talked a lot about this type of thing. And I just knew that I wanted to do something that was going to, hopefully be useful beyond just, for myself. Yeah.
So for people who are listening who may not be familiar with the Photo Camp, why don't you describe what it is and what it's been doing for the last 20 years?
Yeah. So Photo Camp is a photography mentoring program. We work with youth from a variety of situations all around the country and all around the world. But the idea is to use the power of storytelling and photography to guide and inspire young people to see the power of their own stories. So it started out as something called Vision Workshops, which was my nonprofit that I started, I guess, 22 years ago. And that started, by working with young people in the juvenile drug court system in my hometown here in Annapolis, Maryland. And as I said, I had been an assistant and knew some folks at National Geographic. So I think I invited some editors and people that I knew at Geographic to one of my early fundraisers. And that's how it all began. They sort of became interested and talked to me about, National Geographic maybe would be interested in using photography and our, the resources and the talent that they have. And from there, we created Photo Camp 20 years ago.
So what were these kids, what were you teaching them at the time? Because these kids they may have known how to take a picture, but they didn't necessarily know how to tell a story or even more importantly, believe that they had an important story to tell.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was taking the things that I learned at Ohio University and my storytelling classes and things like that, and that I had been learning as a young photojournalist, just using those techniques to put the camera and the pen and the journal in the hands of the people whose stories were being told. And you're right. Some of them had never used a camera before. And the idea was just to, yeah, you're right. Sort of ask them to use these tools to create stories of their own and to know how important and valuable their stories are, no matter what their circumstances. I mean, everyone has a story, and whether you're young or old, or you're a kid in the juvenile drug treatment court program, or a student in a community that doesn't generally have access to these types of things. It's listening to them and asking them to see the power of their own stories.
Were you nervous when you first started doing it?
No, I really wasn't. I was just sort of doing it. I was just like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. And I have to say, I had a lot of fun with it, and I still do. I mean, 22 years later, I still have so much fun. Every time I walk into the classroom for the first time, everyone's a little anxious, a little nervous. They don't know what to expect. Mm-hmm. You're gathering these amazing, National Geographic explorers and photographers from around the world, and you're kind of coming together. No one knows what's going to happen. No one really knows what's going to what to expect. But something beautiful is always created. I mean, we're asking them to share a story. In 5 or 6 days from now, we're going to share your, group stories or your team stories or individual stories with your families, your communities. We're going to post them on Instagram sometime. No one really knows what that's going to look like. But that's the magic of it. I mean, how many things in your life do you have where you really just don't know what to expect? And it's just, you're kind of creating something with a group of people in person. It's really fun.
You're working with these kids for only a limited amount of time. And for anybody who's in photography, there's so much that you're learning and are still learning, even after doing it decades. But you're taking on a big task in terms of teaching people how to tell story. So how do you kind of refine what are the essential things that these kids have to learn, in terms of, say, the mechanics of the camera or how to approach and look at a scene or a moment and make a photograph? Did you guys sort of refine what was at the core of what had to be taught in order to be effective?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a curriculum that we work off of. It's not a cookie cutter approach. And so I would say, in answer to your question, the first thing that we do is we listen. That's in advance when you're working with a community liaison and you're learning about the challenges that this community faces or the beauty of these children's lives, young people's lives. So you're listening very carefully in the ramp up to the class, and especially on the first day. You don't really know until then you meet them on the first day. Everybody's a little quiet and nervous, like I said at first, but then you listen very carefully. There's writing assignments. I think that's super important. So you dive in quickly on having, short writing prompts and assignments that you might determine the night before the class starts with the community team leaders that have come in to work with you. So you're really learning about the young people themselves. And then, of course, we have our curriculum. I was going to say our standard curriculum, but I want to emphasize that it's just not a rubber stamp. Like, we're going to do composition on day 1 and light on day 2. I mean, of course, we use all those elements that you would find in any photography workshop: light, balance, perspective, composition, and you're using that as your building block. But I have found in my experience, most young people think photography is pretty cool. So it's kind of an easy way to like bring them in. And they love it. We're having fun. We're having campfires at night, and they've never had s'mores sometimes. We're doing things like that. So it's a really sort of camp family bonding atmosphere, but you're using photography as the language of your group, and the camera kind of unlocks their creativity. So I don't know if that answers your question,
no,
but
it does.
I'd say it's different every time a little bit, but it's based on a foundation of a photography workshop.
That writing prompt, I think, is a really a valuable tool to use. I use it when I teach certain some of my classes. Can you give me an example of one of the writing prompts that you have used and what came of it?
Yeah, one of my favorite recent ones is we have traveled to New Zealand on a series of 5 photo camps that we did in partnership with Air New Zealand. And on one of those camps, as I said, our partners find deep roots in the communities and educators for us to work with, so we don't just sort of drop in without knowledge. So we worked with a group of Pacifica youth in Auckland, and this is something that we have known a little bit, and we've worked along these lines in other camps. But I realized very quickly that this particular group was very respectful of their elders, very interested in their ancestry and things like that. So we developed a writing prompt, which was essentially simple: write a letter to your ancestors. And I kind of, developed that again with the team leaders and the community liaisons, sometimes with the students themselves. Like, here's my idea. What do you guys want to write about? Here's, help me design the writing prompt. So write a letter to your ancestors was that one in New Zealand. And the students were so, they were very kind of quiet when I was talking about it. And then, but then, I said, okay, the first draft is due. This isn't school. This is, I just want you to have fun with this and do something meaningful to you. And it was due at like 5:00 or something the next day. And they all lined up, all 20 of them lined up at my, office hours there at the camp. And they were all wanting to talk with me about it and, hone their writing, revise, edit. So it was so powerful. Some of their writings were so powerful that we ended up doing some video, recordings of them reading their letters, and they were very powerful. Like we had a little studio set up in the forest outside the photo camp, and they all just, took it really seriously. They stood up very proudly. Some of them changed their whole kind of goofy demeanors that they had 10 minutes before. And they very proudly read this letter that they had written to their ancestors. It was really important to them, and that paired with their photography. So that was a really cool experience.
So what does it look like? How many students do you have, instructors, facilitators? How long does it last on average?
Yeah, so it's 20 students in each camp, and there are 8 staff, so full of National Geographic explorers, photographers, editors, a technical director, logistics coordinator, so those type of people. And then 4 team leaders. We divide the 20 students into 4 teams, and 4 team leaders are led by community photographers sometimes, explorers that are from that region or from other regions, but just have a background in that particular community, working in those communities. So it's 8 staff, 20 students, and a couple of community liaisons and partners for a group of about 30 in most camps. And the camps last for 5 to 6 days.
An intense 5 days.
Yeah, we do a lot. I mean, they stay over with us. Like, it's a residential camp, so they're not going home in the evenings. We are staying at a facility or a lodge or, camp kind of setting together, usually like dorms, that kind of thing. But it's an intense 5 days, but it's, sunrise assignments to evening campfires all day. There's not a lot of sleeping that happens during the camps.
You're dealing with kids who come from difficult circumstances. Some may have been refugees, or some may have just had hard lives based on where they're living. And, it makes the act of them opening up and expressing themselves a very vulnerable choice. to do. So I'm sure that you guys, especially with the coordinators, are very sort of sensitive to that.
Yes, we have to be very cautious. It's not just dropping in and saying, hey, we want to hear your stories. I think that it's very important to let them know that this isn't for us. We would like to know if they want to share a story. And if they do, it's their choice. They own it and they can share whatever story that they would like. It's a lot of listening, a lot of, we are not like, we don't even have our cameras out most of the time. We're not there to photograph. We're there to listen and to learn from them. And I think when you pose it that way, you also still have to tread lightly and carefully as these stories are being shared with you, and lean heavily on your partners to know, what's appropriate to be talking about with these kids. And just, we take a lot of care with that question for sure.
Yeah. But I think it's, especially considering what's the age range for the kids that are participating?
It's 17 to 22 generally. Okay. Yeah, so sometimes we've worked with a little bit younger, a little bit older, but generally it's between 17 and 22.
But that's an incredibly transformative time. I mean, for that to happen, it can be incredibly empowering because likely most of them have never had an opportunity to realize that they had a voice. Or that they had anything.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that they've always had a voice, and I think they know that too. The way that we talk about it is we are there to, guide or inspire them to see the power of their own voice. I used to say in the early days that we give them a voice, but I don't say that anymore. I say that we encourage them to see the power of their own voice. And that's a very important distinction in the way that I talk about it with them as well. They know that, I don't feel like we're there to be the hero. National Geographic has a big name and it can be a little bit intimidating sometimes, but I think it's important that they know that we are there to listen to them and to learn from them. There's a lot of intergenerational mentorship that's happening on a photo camp. You could have as many as 5 generations of people.
Yeah.
If you have some of the older, more experienced photographers and, the students themselves, and we're all learning from one another. And I think they know that, by the end.
What are some of the stories that we've witnessed these kids share or these young adults share, that really impacted you? We
worked, in a community where there were a lot of transgender youth, and again, treading very carefully and leaning heavily on our partners to know, what the backgrounds were of the students and what they wanted to share. And in that community, there was a lot of self-harm, being done sometimes because they had been asked to leave their homes, by parents or family members that didn't understand them, things like that. And this is in the book. We talk about this because one of the students, had tried to take her own life. That was obviously very, difficult story for her to talk about and to tell. But she had sleeves covering her arms, where she had tried to harm herself. And, during the course of our conversations, and it was a real, bonding situation with this entire group of students. They were all really there for one another, and we were there for them as well, and talking about, how photography can help to sort of build your confidence and share your story. And she decided on her own, I'd like to share this story because I think it can be helpful to other people. And, there was a lot of, are you sure you don't have to do, but she made a self-portrait of her arm showing these scars and showing the one arm that was free of scars. And that was a metaphor for her future, that she felt that her future was going to be more positive. And so that self-portrait that she made was really meaningful to her. And as we were putting together the book, I was working on it during the time I was with that camp. And she's like, I would really love to share my story, like in your book, if you're interested in. And so we did. I mean, and so that was really driven by her, but it was a powerful story of using, photography and the beautiful writing that she did to go along with it to, see her own power in her own story.
Yeah. And that must have been really empowering for everyone else who was participating, because I was once teaching a creative writing course to high school students. And part of the exercise was to talk about something that was really important to you know, that you had feelings about. And one of the girls in the class, and I asked people to come up and read it. And this is one of the first times I'd ever taught people around that age group. So I was bloody terrified because I was looking at all their faces.
So many adults are terrified of teenagers.
Because I walked into the room and it's just blank. They're just staring at me. It's like
they're checking out what you're wearing.
Yeah, I've just been thrown into the middle of Children of the Damned, Village of the Damned. If anybody remembers that movie, and I'm just getting nothing back. But I keep going. I give him this exercise to do, and this girl was talking about breaking up with a boy who happened to be in sort of the class.
Oh no!
Yeah, but what was remarkable about it is that everybody sort of applauded her because of the choice to be that open and vulnerable, and that really kind of transformed what everybody else was doing in the class. It was as if it gave them permission to do the same. So I suspect that when you're teaching and facilitating this, when someone like the person you just talked about opens up that way, that other people around them realize that they can do the same.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I've had that happen as well. And, to your point, another thing that happens is that first day, not on all photo camps, but on many, there's a lot of kind of quiet sort of, they're teenagers. They're sort of checking you out. They don't know what to expect. And then by the final show that we do on the last day, almost invariably there are tears. We're all hugging and, saying goodbye. We're going to miss each other. And we stay in touch with one another as well. So a community has been created. The ones that want to stay in touch, they all do. I'm in touch with dozens, I don't know, if not hundreds of students that continue to reach out to me and to the other photographers. And I know through following along on the WhatsApp group and the Instagram groups and things like that, they stay in touch with one another. There's a group in Brownsville, Texas that I worked with recently, and they're all young, aspiring photojournalists. They were a little bit on the older side. They were young, college students basically. So they're all pursuing this career in journalism, photography, and storytelling. And I just watch this WhatsApp group where they are just all in touch with one another, getting together, supporting each other's graduations, offering opportunities that they've learned about in photography. It's a semi, professional sort of WhatsApp group. But at the same time, they're, going to the volleyball game and the concert together and stuff. It's a beautiful thing to witness, the bonds that are created and remain for a long time after the camp is over. So
when the professional photographer is working with this student, over the span of 5 days, tell me how a story sort of takes shape. Because, they're going out and they're making photographs, but they don't necessarily have an understanding that it's all moving towards the goal of culling images down, editing them, and making a selection that expresses a narrative. Tell me about the relationship between them and the photographer and all the different things that they're learning to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, I think they get the gist of it pretty quickly because we dive in, as you noted, it's a pretty quick and intense workshop. So they figure that out pretty quickly because the structure is we generally, the photographers will come in and start, presenting their work and showing the power of photography, showing several stories that they've worked on versus single images. So they're getting the sense of it on the first day, but how do you do that? So the photographers work, as I said, we divide them into 4 teams. And so day one, they get out on an assignment. They do an assignment about light or, go out that first day. And then we review, and the editor and the photographers review that work that night. And the very next morning, they're already seeing their work. So, and that work is being discussed in the context of a story, not just like, here's the best image that we saw out of the 3,000 that we looked at last night. It's like, here's a story that could be developed. And then we have discussion groups. Okay, what kind of story do you think you want to tell? And they really warm up to it very quickly. You'd be surprised. Like, it took me semesters and years to kind of learn some of these concepts, but we're very focused on it. We're very focused on the power of the story and the sequence. And so these photographers rove throughout the teams. They go out with them photographing. They do the feedback, and, we don't really call them critique sessions. We call them feedback sessions because we're trying to, provide learning opportunities. And then on day 3, we have a big packet of prints that have come from other stories on other photo camps, and we throw them all out on the table. And okay, green team, see if you can take these 40 pictures and develop a picture story with a beginning, a middle, an end, an overall, a detail, a portrait. So it's not just a series of random pictures, but an 8-print story that, tells an actual narrative story from another photo camp that they weren't even part of. And they love that exercise because it also brings them into the photo camp family. They're looking at a story on rickshaw drivers in India or a fishing community in Alaska or something. And they think that's kind of cool too, because those are all young photographers just like them. But their team has to take this big pile of photos and create a narrative story. So it's a common, I think photography workshop exercise, but we kind of work on it all day, every day until the last day. Each team presents their own story. And then we have this, final show, and they might not really get it until after that day, but that's okay. Like then they can go on into their lives and use that technique if they want to,
The Charcoal Book Club is back as a sponsor and wants to share a special event coming in 2024. The Chico Review is an annual event that gathers photographers to celebrate their love for photography. It's more than just an opportunity to share your work and meet publishers and editors. It's a rare chance to be surrounded and immersed by a community that prioritizes photography and being a photographer over the latest camera reviews. If you have never had such an experience, mark the date and register for the event scheduled for March 17th through the 24th in Prairie, Montana. Find out more by visiting chicoreview.com or visit charcoalbookclub.com today. When looking at the photographs on the website, I'm so impressed by some of the sophistication of some of the compositions. And I can't help but feel like that it's like they don't necessarily know what they're doing, but there must be something sort of intrinsically happening that allows them to make a composition that I go, damn, it took me 30 years to learn how to do that.
Yeah. And also it's just a fresh eye. This isn't true of all of them for sure, but some of them have never held a camera or never held this kind of camera or never thought about composition or this kind of storytelling. And it's also just, I love working with young photographers because they just have this fresh, unjaded eye. And I think a lot of people just understand composition, or they're artistic or creative. And they're also seeing National Geographic work that same morning and talking about composition, and then seeing their own work up on the screen and having the photographers say, wow, look how beautifully you've used the rule of thirds here. And then of course they're inspired the next day. I mean, you work with young people, it sounds like, as well. I mean, just a little bit of encouragement on something real, something that they really have done well. A pat on the back, some encouragement at that age. I remember that. Like, that can change your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Change the trajectory of what you decide you want to do with your life. That's why I became an English major, because my high school English teacher told me I was a pretty good writer. And I was like, oh, okay. Like someone told me I'm good at something. Like those things matter.
It started domestically, but now it's international, or has been international for quite a while. How have you had to sort of adapt, and sort of reshape it as you've taken it abroad?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've reshaped it, but just being, culturally aware, culturally conscious, making sure that we understand the context by working closely with community partners and not just kind of jet setting in and not having an understanding of the community. So we work really hard to also work with a really diverse range of National Geographic explorers and photographers. They are from all over the world, and they making sure you have someone that's from the region or speaks the language, speaks Spanish. So I would just say adapting in that way, making sure that we are truly trying to bring something positive and useful to the communities in which we serve, and to try and understand and listen as best as we possibly can in each circumstance.
Tell me about this, the support that you've gotten. You've mentioned National Geographic, but, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of effort, and a lot of money involved in making this happen, especially over sort of 2 decades. And that's a whole new thing you had to learn, right?
Right. I didn't know how to fund. At the beginning, I was, through vision workshops, I was fundraising and trying to piece it all together and figure it out that way. But National Geographic Society is a huge, support of the program. It is a National Geographic Society program. And so they fund, the workshops. They find partners that also support the workshops financially. Fujifilm Camera has donated cameras for us. There's a great staff. I can't believe I have this incredible team and staff at National Geographic Society that makes, to your point, so many different things have to work. The equipment, the carnets for sending equipment overseas, just, the contract, just all the administrative and other types of support, as well as, idea support and brainstorming and things like that. So National Geographic Society is, really leaned into this project and understood the value and the potential of it. So that's been really exciting over the years.
Well, I know that you've transformed a lot of lives. I was watching about one fella who I forget what country in Africa they were profiling him. And he didn't even have a camera. He was just taking his memory card and asking different people to use their camera, and then eventually began a career as a photojournalist, which I thought was just amazing. And that likely was something you probably could never have anticipated when you first had the germ of this idea in your head.
Yeah, that was the story of Bullen Chol. And I love how you told the story. The one part you missed is that, so he would take that SD card that he got his hands on, an SD card, and put it in cameras that he was borrowing from his friends that worked for the NGOs in South Sudan is where he was. And he won a prize with one of his photographs, the prize for which was a camera. And that is the camera that he began to use. So I know his story very well, and it's indicative of I think what you're asking about, because he was really inspired by a photographer named Ed Cashy. You may have heard of him. And Ed was, oh, you've had him on the show?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was one of the mentors on this, this photo camp that Bullen was on. Bullen was on track he was maybe going to try to study business or something like that, but his life was completely changed by that photo camp, and he decided to become a photojournalist, and now he is a working photojournalist. We have hired him to come back as a team leader for a photo camp we did in a refugee settlement in Uganda. He grew up in a refugee camp himself, so he came in as a team leader, and now next week he is coming to Washington, D.C., National Geographic headquarters to serve as a team leader for our 20th anniversary alumni class. So we've kept in good, and he has definitely kept in touch with me. We probably text each other, pretty often. And I follow along with his career and, continue to try and provide mentorship and opportunities for him, as well as he teaches me a lot as well. So.
Yeah. One of the conversations that I've heard recently is the idea of the ethics of telling the stories of people who have experienced trauma, and the responsibility that the storyteller, a writer or a photographer has. But in this particular case, you're empowering the very people who have experienced, to tell their own stories. How do you feel that's, if it has at all, sort of changed or helped your own sense of that responsibility evolve or change or be influenced by what you've witnessed?
Well, I think you're right. The point behind this entire project is for the young people themselves who are experiencing I always say, the challenges and also the beauty and, all the things that are part of their story. They're the ones telling these stories, not me, and not someone else that's coming in. We're there to listen, to learn their stories and understand, but they are the ones ultimately in charge of where they're going to point the camera, what they're going to write about. It's their story to tell. That one of the young refugees that I have worked with, and I write about her in the book as well, Abigail, she at one point said to us, I've learned that my story is really important and that maybe it can inspire others. So that's her choice, to take that story and tell what she wants of it. And if she feels like it might inspire other people, then that's her choice, not ours, So
tell me about putting together the book, because you had a lot of material, a lot of stories to have to choose from. It must have been a daunting effort in and of itself, on top of everything you're already doing, making the choice to take on a book.
Well, there was a whole team. There was a team of a writer and a designer and a photo editor, Kathy Moran, a well-known and incredible photo editor that was working on the project. Of course, I worked closely with Kathy and the writer to, provide all the hard drives and, background on all the camps and stories, and mainly the writing, to try and figure out which excerpts of writing to use. You're right. It was daunting, but it was also really, I think it was important, because when I look at that book now and I see it all woven together, it really, I think it weaves together a story of these generations of young people that's very hopeful, very positive, despite challenges that many of them have gone through. I think it tells a story of the power of young people's voices in the world.
What did you, when you looked at the book, especially when you finally held, the mock-up of the book and you held it in your hands and you looked at it, what did you think about what you had started when you saw that? Because it's one thing.
I cried.
Okay. Because it's one thing to sort of be in the middle of it, doing it all the time and knowing that you've had an impact. But when you're holding something tangible that reflects all those years of effort, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. And I just felt like, wow, this is their book. This is, I can't wait to, when the alumni class comes in a couple of weeks, I can't wait to give them all copies of it. That many of them are represented in the book. I don't know how we're gonna try and share the book with as many people that are represented in it as we possibly can. But yeah, when I looked at it the first time, I just cried, because it was so much work. I'd never done anything like that before. And again, it wasn't, I didn't create the book. It was a book being created by a team at National Geographic, but I poured my heart and soul into it, and advising and supporting and helping select and images and writing and things like that. And it just meant a lot to me. And it also helped me, just be really excited and inspired to keep going forward with it. It's, 20 years isn't the end of it. It's just, I feel like it's just starting.
I mean, I hear it in your voice. You're just as excited now as you likely were when you
I know,
first started.
totally. Like, it's like, you have no idea. It is so much fun. I mean, how lucky am I to be able to, create something like this and then create it alongside these teams of amazing people. So it's certainly not one person that, I might have come up with the idea 20 years ago, but now there's teams of people that love it and get it and are inspired by it. And then thousands of students that now also really get it. And one of the more important parts of it that I'd love to share is that some of these students are now pitching ideas for photo camps. They're becoming National Geographic Young Explorers. They've applied for grants and gotten grants. Not tons of them, but I think there's 4 of them that have gotten Young Explorer grants. And one of those has recently pitched an idea to do a photo camp in his community in Juchitán, Mexico. We just did that a few months ago. Like, those are the types of things that are so exciting. It's not just sort of me picking places and finding, figuring out ideas of how to do this. It's now, legions of other people and young people that love this because they realize how fun it is and how important it is. And so new ideas are being infused into it all the time, which is, I find that really exciting.
So how do people how are the kids chosen to participate in this? How do people within those communities know to get involved? I know you're working with organizations, but are you pretty much relying on the organizations to help make that part of it happen?
Yeah, definitely. The partner organizations select the communities, and when we vet them, of course, we learn as much as we can. But the partner organizations select the students and the schools and things like that we work with. So yeah, we lean heavily on our partners in that sense.
And how many of these do you hold a year?
This year we had, we're doing our last one in a couple of weeks, and that'll be number 16 this year. And
Wow.
it has varied a little bit wildly in the past few years because of the pandemic. So I think in 2019 we were on a roll. I think we did like 20 photo camps in 2019. Which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but as I've mentioned, it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's very tailored to the community. So 20 was a good number. And then the pandemic happened. And so we were virtual for a couple of years. We did some very cool virtual photo camps during those years. And then starting in 2022, I guess that was just last year, ramped up the in-person again. I mean, we have the capacity to do more than 20 for sure, because now we have lots of people who are interested. We have staff, we have, equipment and things like that. But our general numbers have varied quite a bit, especially over the past few years.
And since you started it, the ubiquity of smartphones and the ability for everybody to take photographs is pretty obvious. I mean, you just walk out your front door and everybody's sort of looking at this little piece of metal and circuitry in their hand all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's changed people's relationship to photography, right? Especially the access of a sophisticated camera, which was really because of the cost, was just outside the means of a lot of people, especially outside of like Western developed countries. How has that device sort of changed the way that the students relate to the photography, not only when they come to you, but when you're working with them? Has that had a significant influence?
Well, I think one thing that we talk about during the photo camp is that it doesn't really matter what device you're using. We happen to be using these Fujifilm cameras that then, we always wish that we could leave them with the students, but working with thousands of students, you can't. We have 2 kits of equipment that travel around the world. And I think the students appreciate that. Of course, they jokingly or sometimes not so jokingly say, "Oh, can we, keep this camera?" But they also, I think they find it valuable that it's going to another place and that other people are going to have this experience. In fact, they write little camera bag notes that you might have seen in the back of the book as well, that they tuck into the camera bags saying, "Good luck with the camera, take good care of it." So I think they also appreciate the fact that this is a program that travels around the world. And, but anyway, on one of the last days, we talk about, what's next after the photo camp's over and the cameras are packed away. And not all of them, but many of them have cell phone cameras that they can use. And we talk about the idea that it's not the camera, it's the intent behind the camera, and it's the eye behind the camera, the story that you want to tell. You can use your cell phone. We encourage them to use their cell phones to continue telling stories if they don't have access to another camera. So yeah, I think that that's important because now so many more, it's such a democratic, art form. So many more people have the ability to take pictures with their phones, but we should mention that not all of them do. We work in lots of different communities and not all of them have cell phone cameras. So, that's something to think about and talk about, and talking about writing their own stories. So yeah, it has changed, but not fundamentally.
Yeah. As you mentioned before, there have been some of the participants who have gone on to professional careers. And as you well know, the professional photographic world, be it editorial or commercial, has sort of changed dramatically. Some people lament, the past and sort of romanticize what was past. But when you are working with people like these young people who are probably just as excited and enthusiastic about making pictures and telling stories as we were when we were their age, they aren't as dour about future possibilities. So how do you and the team sort of help them to sort of facilitate that pursuit, once the photo camp's over?
Yeah, I mean, they don't have anything to compare it to the old days, so they don't know maybe what some people are kind of complaining about in the changes in the industry. But there are all kinds of ways that people make a life and a living with photography, and I think we just encourage them to keep talking with us, keep applying for grants. I can't tell you how many letters of recommendation I've written for some of these photo camp alum for grants that they're applying for, and studies, college programs and things like that to study journalism and photography. And we should say that the point of photo camp is not to develop all of these students into photographers and photojournalists. It doesn't matter really what they end up doing as long as they've had a good, solid, meaningful experience with us in talking about their own stories. But the ones that do, to the point of your question, the ones that do want to pursue that career, like Bolin, as we've talked about in South Sudan and so many others, there are ways. I don't mean to be naive, but there are ways that you can make it as a photographer, and we hope to inspire with role models. Some of the, particularly some of the team leaders that come in are the new National Geographic Explorer / photographers, storytellers that come in to work with them. They present their work and say, hey, I'm 25 years old and just a little bit older than you all, and this is how my career has progressed. This is how I got a grant from National Geographic Society or other grants. This is what I'm working on. This is what I'm doing. So there are lots of ways. I think I've learned so much from some of these Nat Geo explorers about the different ways, the different types of people that are making a living with storytelling and photography careers that I never even knew of. There's some incredibly innovative people. And I think that that's inspiring to the youth. They might not all aspire to be a Nat Geo explorer or photographer, but they can see. Just the other day, we had a photo camp, and one of the students stood up and said, he was a DC resident, and said, wow, you guys are all so passionate about what you do and with photography. I think I've learned a lot from that, and that's going to help. That's going to help inform the way I live my life and choose my career. He said it more eloquently than that, but I thought that's one of the ways that we kind of talk about that conversation with them.
Is there a particular story that really challenged your assumptions of a community, of a people, of a group, that when you saw the work, it really made you realize that, oh, I thought I knew, but I really didn't?
Yeah, not really. I don't have a good answer for that. I can't think of an example of something like that. I hope that I'm just kind of open when I get there, but I can't think of a time that I was like really surprised by something or my assumptions were challenged, because hopefully maybe like the best. I hope that maybe I didn't have as many assumptions coming into a lot of these places as I might have. I try to keep my mind open when I get there.
How's this work made you a better photographer and storyteller?
A better storyteller for sure. Yes. And I think that I wish I could be doing more photography myself. I'm sometimes not, but I recently got a new camera. So you know how exciting that is.
Yes.
Because I'm learning so much from the students, from the photographers I'm working with. And sometimes I'm like, I really am not shooting as much because I don't have time. But I have decided to get this new camera in my hands. And that's really jazzed me about starting some more photography work of my own again.
Has it given you a little sense of greater clarity in terms of what stories are important for you to tell?
Yeah, yes, definitely. In fact, just recently, I started making portraits of and interviewing for the stories of my mom, because she's told me really cool stories over the years. And I've always been like, oh, that's interesting. Never really written them down or anything. But just this past summer, I thought, why don't I lean into the advice that I'm giving all these students around the world? focus on your own story. And I decided to do a project with my mom where I'm interviewing her, and she is loving it. I thought she'd be kind of nervous in front of the camera, but she loves it, and it's so important. And I will have that project with me for the rest of my life. And I'm so glad that I'm doing it now instead of, wishing I had done it later.
Yeah. I think that the project in the book are a valuable lesson for anyone who picks up a camera, because all of the people in this book are telling their own story. Mm-hmm. Right. They're not looking at themselves and going, "Oh, I live in an exotic location."
Right.
It's what they know. And
or I live in a location that's not beautiful. Like they're showing us the beauty of whatever location.
Yeah, it's the way that they're seeing it that makes it special and remarkable and beautiful and impactful. Yeah. And I think that goes for anyone. It's just making. Yeah,
sometimes we think our own stories aren't that interesting, but they're fascinating. Like no matter who you are, everyone has a story. And you see things that nobody else sees, point your camera at it and show us and put it together. I mean, these young people often, put it together in a little portfolio. Don't worry what we did during the camp. That was only 5 days. Now you have thousands of images and these writing drafts that we've stayed up all night looking at and reading. Like put it together in a portfolio piece. And I think that they do that. They send me things all the time after the camp. Like, what do you think about this? And, I love that.
If people are listening and they go, I would love for something like this to be brought to my community or to be supportive of it, how would they go about that?
Well, they can reach out to me. They can find me on Instagram. I mean, maybe that's a good way to, I'm always looking for and interested in ideas, in various communities. Now, the most important thing is that they have a really deep connection to youth populations in that community. It can't just be, something like, oh, I'd love to go to some faraway place and have a photo camp. Like it has to be, we look for partners who work already and are deeply invested in various communities. So, we're always open for ideas, and I can maybe drop in the chat, or you could include my Instagram. That's a good way to reach me. It's at Kirsten Elstner. And they should also follow at NG Photo Camp to kind of see the stories that we're working on, the types of stories that we do.
Great. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why? Oh
my goodness. There's so many. Victor Zea from Cusco, Peru. His last name is Zea, Victor Zea. And I've recently started working with him, and he's a master of light and a wonderful teacher that we've had working on several photo camps this year.
Well, awesome. Kirsten, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking with you.
Over the past year, we have lost many great photographers, including Elliot Erwitt, Douglas Kirkland, Larry Fink, and John Isaac, all of whom I've met and 3 of whom I was honored to have as guests on the show. I'm so glad that I had a chance to spend time with each of them. Their passings remind me of one of the reasons why this show is so important. In a small way, it serves as an important archive of the photographers and their work, but it also shares their humanity through these intimate conversations. It's a big reason I do this, and I hope you'll support it financially by becoming a Patreon supporter today. You can contribute $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/The Candid Frame. Again, it's patreon.com/The Candid Frame. Thanks. Thanks to Kirsten for joining us. Learn more about the National Geographic Photo Camp by visiting nationalgeographic.org or visiting our website. And if you're a fan of our work, you can write reviews on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts and share a favorite episode on your social networks, be it Twitter/X, Facebook, or Instagram. Remember to use the hashtag #TheCandidFrame. You can also support us financially by contributing via PayPal or Patreon. Thanks to Zach Winiger, Patrick Gauthier, and Carl Warren for their recent contributions. We've also relaunched our newsletter if you want to receive updates on everything related to TCF, including book recommendations, announcements for special events, and workshops from us and some of our guests. Please sign up by visiting our website. And if you can't find every show episode on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor. You can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.